What is the most disturbing internet rabbit hole you've fallen down? Story 1 on January 5, 2012. An image appeared on 4chan. White text on black background. Hello. We are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we have devised a test. There is a message hidden in this image. Find it, and it will lead you on the road to finding us. Good luck. Signed, 3301. That was the beginning. The puzzle that followed ran for years and drew on cryptography, steganography, ancient philosophy, number theory, cybersecurity, and eventually physical locations across multiple continents. Phone numbers hidden in prime number sequences, QR codes physically attached to lamp posts in Warsaw, Dallas, Seoul, and elsewhere, coordinating a hunt that required the collective intelligence of thousands of people working in parallel online. The people who got furthest into the puzzle signed NDAs. The few who've spoken publicly describe it escalating into genuinely opaque territory, texts associated with a group called Liber Primus, philosophical content that was apparently part of the test rather than incidental. The final stages of the 2012 puzzle involved direct contact with the puzzle organizer, and nobody who received that contact has said what happened next. 3 separate puzzles ran in 2012, 2013, and 2014. After that, silence. The 3301 organization, whoever or whatever it is, has not publicly communicated since. Theories include intelligence agency recruitment, private security firm recruitment, a genuinely anonymous group of cryptographers who built the thing for reasons of their own, and a very elaborate art project. The most honest answer: nobody outside the inner circle knows who ran it, what it was for, or what happened to the people who completed it. The puzzle itself remains one of the most sophisticated and well-documented internet mysteries in existence. The people who got to the end haven't talked. Story 2. Sometime in 2015, a YouTube channel called Unfavorable Semicircle began uploading videos. By the time YouTube deleted it in 2016, it had posted approximately 50,000 videos, a number that exceeds the upload capacity of normal human operation and suggested automated generation. The videos were mostly very short, some only seconds, and contained visual static, audio noise, distorted speech fragments, and apparently random imagery. People found them because they started appearing in recommendation algorithms for unrelated searches. The experience of encountering them without context was reported as deeply unsettling, not because of explicit content, but because of the combination of apparent meaninglessness and apparent structure. Something was generating these videos with a purpose that wasn't visible. The internet's investigation into Unfavorable Semicircle ran for over a year. Spectral analysis of the audio found patterns that weren't random. Some images hidden in the audio frequency domain appeared to show text or imagery. Long videos appeared to contain fragments that could be assembled into something larger. Some researchers identified what appeared to be a message in a particular video file's spectrogram. Others found apparent geographic coordinates. Nothing was conclusively decoded. YouTube deleted the channel after it attracted attention as a suspected botnet or spam operation. The operator was never identified. No complete explanation for what Unfavorable Semicircle was, a botnet test, a data exfiltration tool, an art project, a glitch in some automated system, was ever established. The unsolved quality of it is what sticks. Something spent years systematically generating thousands of strange videos and uploading them to YouTube, and when it was shut down, it left no trace of what it was or what it was trying to do. Story 3. WebDriver Torso was a YouTube channel that began uploading videos in 2013 that consisted of blue and red rectangles accompanied by beeping tones, in sequences that varied slightly from video to video. The channel uploaded tens of thousands of these videos over a period of about a year before the mystery was solved. The investigation followed the Unfavorable Semicircle pattern, but had a resolution. Journalists and internet investigators traced the channel to Google's own automated testing systems. The videos were being uploaded by Google's own infrastructure as part of a video quality testing protocol. Each video tested how YouTube's encoding handled slightly different color and tone combinations, generating a vast library of comparison data. The resolution is satisfying in a way that most internet mysteries aren't. But the rabbit hole's legacy is the pre-solution experience. Thousands of people collectively convinced that something deeply strange was happening, generating theories about secret messages, coded communications, and surveillance systems. The actual answer, Google's robots were doing quality testing, is so mundane that it almost seems like a better cover story than the mystery deserved. The WebDriver torso investigation established a template for how internet communities approach mysterious channels: audio spectrogram analysis, video metadata examination, pattern recognition across the full upload history, attempts to contact the account, investigation of associated accounts and IP data. The methodology developed in pursuit of WebDriver torso was refined and applied to everything that came after. The channel is still up. It still uploads the rectangle videos occasionally. Google never took it down after the mystery was solved. The beeping rectangles continue. Story 4: The Markovian Parallax Denigrate. A 1996 Usenet post that has never been explained despite 25 years of trying in August 1996. A Usenet post appeared under the name JQJ8KMAAK in multiple newsgroups simultaneously. The post consisted entirely of what appeared to be random words. Markovian Parallax Denigrate Soy Abogado Steepness Crocus. Hundreds of such posts were sent in a burst across multiple newsgroups, each similarly structured, apparent word salad, no discernible meaning, no response to replies, no apparent relationship to the newsgroups they appeared in. The posts stopped. The account was never used again. The origin was never traced. The posts predated most of the investigation tools that later rabbit hole hunters would develop, and the Usenet infrastructure of 1996 retained records inconsistently. The header information that might have traced the origin is either absent or too corrupted to be useful. What was it? 25 years of periodic investigation has produced theories but no conclusions. A spam test or botnet prototype from an era when neither was common. A coded message whose recipients were already known and for whom the apparent randomness was readable. An early steganography test. A glitch in Usenet propagation software that generated scrambled text. A deliberate provocation by someone who wanted to watch what happened. The specific phrase Markovian Parallax Denigrate has attracted disproportionate attention because it sounds like it means something. Markov chains, parallax astronomy, while not clearly meaning anything specific. The combination suggests technical knowledge. The deployment suggests intentionality. Nobody has decoded it. Nobody has identified who sent it. It remains the earliest surviving unexplained internet mystery, predating the web's popularization, a fragment from the pre-graphical internet that has resisted every attempt at explanation. Story 5 A858. A Reddit account posted encrypted content for years, and when it was solved, nobody liked the answer. The Reddit account A858DE45F56D9BC9 appeared in 2011 and spent years posting to a subreddit it created, called /r/A858DE45F56D9BC9, with content that consisted entirely of long strings of hexadecimal characters. No explanatory text, no responses to questions in the comments, just the hex strings, posted on a regular schedule. The investigation community that assembled to crack A858 was substantial. They identified that the hex strings decoded to data. The data was encrypted. Some of it decoded to images. Some decoded to text. Some appeared to be calendar or scheduling data. The full decryption was never achieved because the key was never found. The account went quiet for extended periods and returned. At one point, when the cracking effort seemed to be making progress, A858 posted a message in plain text acknowledging the investigation was happening and saying, effectively, that the puzzle was not for the public, that it was a private communication channel being used for private purposes, and that the people investigating it were, politely, welcome to stop. This is the part that makes A858 sit differently from other internet mysteries. At some point, the operator acknowledged the existence of the investigation, declined to explain the channel's purpose, and asked people to leave it alone. The investigation largely continued anyway. The subreddit dedicated to solving it is still active. Was it private encrypted communication, intelligence dead dropping, an internal corporate channel using Reddit's public infrastructure, an elaborate ARG? The operator's claim, private channel, none of your business, is the most available answer. Whether it's true is unknown. The hex strings keep coming. The key has not been found. Story 6. Somewhere in Germany in the early 1980s, a teenager recorded songs off a late-night radio program. One of those recordings was a song she'd never heard before. She never heard it again. For decades, it sat on a cassette tape. The tape was digitized, and the song was posted online in 2007 by the woman's brother under the heading "The Most Mysterious Song on the Internet." The song, post-punk, early 80s, male vocalist, distinctly European, was unlike anything in any searchable music database. It had been played once on German radio, recorded by a teenager, and apparently not documented anywhere else. The search that followed is ongoing. Music historians, post-punk collectors, German radio enthusiasts, and casual listeners have all contributed. The song has been shared on music identification forums, played on radio programs specifically asking for identification, and distributed to specialists in obscure European post-punk. No one has identified it. The specific theories, a demo that never received commercial release, played once by a sympathetic DJ and then forgotten. A song by a band that recorded once and dissolved. A local release so limited that no surviving copy exists outside this tape. A song from a country not immediately apparent from the production style. The person who recorded it off the radio in the early 1980s heard something real and kept it. The artist who made it, whoever they were, wherever they are, has apparently not recognized themselves in the clips circulating online, or is not aware they're being searched for, or is deliberately not coming forward. A song played once on German radio in the early 1980s may be the only copy of itself that exists. Story 7. This entry requires care. Daisy's destruction is real. The perpetrators were convicted, and what it represents is documented in court records. The specific content will not be described here. What matters for this context is the investigation and what it revealed. In 2012, Filipino-Australian Peter Scully was operating in the Philippines and running a network that produced and distributed child abuse material through dark web channels that required cryptocurrency payment and demonstrated significant technical sophistication for the era. The network was identified by Australian Federal Police and Interpol through financial investigation. Following cryptocurrency transactions that hadn't been fully anonymized, Scully was convicted in the Philippines in 2018 and sentenced to life imprisonment, later extended. The case is significant in dark web investigation history for several reasons. It was among the first major dark web abuse cases to be cracked through cryptocurrency forensics rather than operational security failures. It established that the dark web markets for this content were substantially more organized than law enforcement had assumed, and it produced a set of investigative techniques that were subsequently applied across multiple other cases. The investigators who worked the case are the ones who have spoken publicly about why this particular rabbit hole matters, not as something to explore, but as something to understand structurally. The specific technical infrastructure that enabled the network, the specific financial trail that exposed it, and the specific international cooperation required to prosecute it across jurisdictions are the elements of the story that have ongoing relevance for how such networks are identified and dismantled. What the Scully case established for investigators is that these networks leave financial traces even when they leave no other traces. That insight has driven subsequent investigations. Story 8, this rabbit hole doesn't have a sinister origin. It starts with a simple realization that becomes harder to process the longer you sit with it. The internet is full of content made by people who are now dead, and most of it will remain there indefinitely, accumulating, unclaimed, unmoderated, undeleted. The YouTube channel, whose last upload is from 2009, and whose comment section has filled with "Are you still alive?" messages. The Facebook profile that still generates birthday notifications for someone who died years ago, producing a stream of confused, sad, or loving messages from people who don't know how to process the notification. The forum account that was very active for 3 years and then simply stopped posting. No announcement, no explanation. The email newsletter that ran for 200 issues and then nothing. The writer apparently gone. The archive still accessible, the specific rabbit hole. Finding these spaces and sitting with them. The comment sections of YouTube accounts belonging to dead people develop their own memorial character over time. People share when they found out, share memories, debate whether the account should be preserved or deleted. Some become genuine digital shrines. The harder rabbit hole. What happens to these accounts when the people who could claim them, family members, designated digital heirs, don't know they exist, or don't have the access credentials, or simply don't think of it? The platform keeps them. The content stays. The person's digital presence continues past their death indefinitely. There are people whose internet presence will outlast everyone who knew them. Some of them made videos for an audience of 50 people, and those videos will remain accessible, technically, for as long as YouTube exists. It is not sinister, it is just strange and sad in a way that the internet is still figuring out what to do with. Story 9, the Ted the Caver cave system. The earliest viral creepypasta that was also real in 2001. A website called Ted the Caver appeared documenting a man named Ted's exploration of an unknown cave system he'd found in the American Midwest. The website was built in the early web style, plain HTML, photographs, text updates, and followed Ted and his friend Brad as they crawled through increasingly tight passages in an unmapped cave, found strange formations, encountered inexplicable sounds, and documented a slow escalation of unsettling events. The website is real. Ted is a real person. The cave is real and has been visited by other cavers who confirmed its existence. The photographs are real photographs of a real cave. This is the specific thing that makes Ted the Caver significant in internet history. It was a genuinely disturbing website about a real experience, not a fictional horror story. The elements that accumulated over the update history, sounds that Ted and Brad couldn't explain, formations that seemed deliberately arranged rather than naturally occurring, a sense of being watched in a cave that shouldn't have had anything watching, photographs that in retrospect seemed to contain shapes that weren't obviously geological. The website was widely circulated and widely misread. Some people thought it was an ARG. Some thought it was pure fiction. Some thought it was documentation of a haunted location. Ted has addressed the question. It was a real caving experience documented honestly. He doesn't claim the unexplained elements were supernatural. He just documented what happened. Ted the Caver established the template for found footage and first-person horror that influenced an entire generation of internet storytelling. It was the pre-creepypasta documentary horror before anyone had a name for the genre. Story 10, the Candle Cove phenomenon. A creepypasta that became so widely believed that adults convinced themselves they'd seen the show Candle Cove is a piece of internet fiction. A creepypasta, written in 2009 by Chris Straub, structured as a forum thread in which adults sharing memories of a childhood TV show called Candle Cove gradually revealed that the show had deeply disturbing content that none of them can fully remember. The format is fictional. Candle Cove, the show, never existed. Except, within years of its publication, people began posting sincerely claiming to remember Candle Cove, not as a joke or a reference, as a genuine childhood memory. The forum format of the original story and the specific mechanism by which memory becomes more vivid when other people confirm it produced a widespread false memory. This is the rabbit hole. The experience of finding the original Candle Cove story and then finding the comment sections full of people who insist they remember watching it, who describe specific episodes, who compare memories with others who also remember, who grew up in specific cities and years where the show would have aired, who feel certain, with the confidence of genuine memory, that Candle Cove was a real show they watched as children. Memory researchers call this social contagion of false memories, the phenomenon by which sharing memory-like material in a social context can produce genuine false memories in people who absorb the shared narrative as their own experience. Candle Cove produced this effect at scale because the story is written to be remembered. It has the texture of a real memory, the format of memory sharing, and the emotional specificity of something true. The story has been adapted into a Black Mirror episode. The people who remember watching Candle Cove as children have a memory of something that never existed, and their memory feels as real to them as any other. Story 11: The Isdal Woman. A cold case so strange that it has 3 possible explanations, and none of them are comfortable on November 29, 1970. A family hiking in the Isdalen Valley near Bergen, Norway found a body. The woman had died from a combination of sleeping pill ingestion and burns. Her body was partially burned and surrounded by evidence suggesting the burning was deliberate. Her face had been burned. Her fingerprints had been removed with acid. Every label had been cut from her clothing. She had been unidentified. The subsequent investigation produced more questions than answers. Her luggage was found in lockers at Bergen train station, packed with false bottom suitcases, multiple identities, and coded notes in her handwriting. She had traveled across Europe using at least 8 different aliases. Witnesses described her as having been followed and observed in hotels. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries were contacted and declined to confirm or deny knowledge of her identity. The mystery has 3 broad families of explanation. She was a spy for an Eastern Bloc country, burned and ended by operatives who needed her identity suppressed. She was a spy for a Western agency, similarly eliminated. She was not a spy at all, but a criminal operating under multiple identities for reasons that have nothing to do with Cold War intelligence, and the elaborate disappearance was her own work, designed to prevent identification. Norwegian public broadcaster NERC pursued the case in 2017 and produced the most comprehensive investigation to date. Na analysis from her remains established that she was likely from the German-speaking part of Europe. Her identity, as of the 2017 investigation, remains officially unknown. 50 years later, a woman burned in a Norwegian valley with her face and fingerprints removed has still not been named. Story 12: The Lead Masks Case. 2 Brazilian men were found dead in ritual circumstances with a note nobody has explained on August 20, 1966. 2 electronics technicians, Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz, were found dead on Vintum Hill near Niterói, Brazil. They were wearing formal suits and waterproof coats. On their faces were crude lead masks, shields made from cut lead sheeting covering their eyes. Beside them was a bottle of water and a damp towel. One of them had a notebook. The notebook entry, 1630 be at the agreed place. 1830 swallow capsules, after effect protect metals, wait for the mask signal. The 2 men had been seen purchasing waterproof coats on the day of their deaths. They had been seen buying water. They arrived at Vintum Hill in the afternoon, apparently to meet someone or wait for something. They had capsules with them. The capsules were never identified chemically. The toxicological analysis was insufficient to determine what they'd ingested. The lead masks have no established function. They don't block meaningful radiation. They don't serve obvious ceremonial purpose in any documented context. The metal signal referenced in the note has no known referent. The men were involved in a local spiritualist group that had been experimenting with contact with extraterrestrial intelligence through rituals involving protective equipment. The specific ritual they were attempting, if it was a ritual, has never been reconstructed from surviving materials. They died of something. They died wearing lead-face shields and formal suits while apparently waiting for a signal. The note they left describes a procedure. Nobody has explained the procedure, the signal, or what they were protecting themselves from. Story 13, the Toynbee Tiles. Someone spent decades embedding mysterious messages in Philadelphia street asphalt across the streets of Philadelphia, and in smaller numbers in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Dozens of tiles have been discovered embedded in road asphalt. The tiles are made of linoleum, embedded when the asphalt was soft or newly laid, and inscribed with variations on the same message, Toynbee idea, in Kubrick's 2001 Resurrect Dead on Planet Jupiter. The tiles started appearing in the 1970s and continued into the early 2000s. Some are still in place, discoverable if you know the intersections to look at. They were made and placed by a single person who is believed to have died in 2003 and who was never publicly identified with certainty during their lifetime. The investigation by Justin Dewar, documented in the 2011 film Resurrect Dead: The Mystery of the Toynbee Tiles, identified the most likely candidate, Sevi Labatka, a reclusive Philadelphia resident who had corresponded with newspapers about ideas connecting Arnold Toynbee's philosophy of civilization to Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, and who specifically discussed the idea of resurrecting humanity on Jupiter as a kind of philosophical project. The film's investigation found Labatka had likely died without confirmation. It found the specific house where some tiles appeared to have been made. It found the radio shows on which he had called in to explain his ideas to an audience that mostly didn't understand them. The Toynbee tiles are real objects in the streets of American cities. They were made by a person who believed, apparently sincerely, in something about Jupiter and resurrection and Toynbee and Kubrick, and who spent decades embedding that belief in road surfaces where strangers would find it. Story 14, number stations. Cold War spy infrastructure that's still broadcasting, and nobody official will admit why. If you have a shortwave radio and you tune to the right frequencies at the right times, you can still hear them. Automated voices, sometimes robotic, sometimes children's voices, sometimes synthesized, reading strings of numbers or letters in specific cadences. They broadcast from unknown locations. They have been broadcasting since at least the 1950s. No government has officially acknowledged operating them. The function of number stations, they're called that because of the number strings they broadcast, is understood well enough by signals intelligence researchers and by defectors who've confirmed it. They're one-time pad communications to intelligence agents in the field. The broadcast is received by the agent, who has a one-time pad keyed to that station that allows them to decode the message. The broadcast is meaningless without the pad. It can't be traced or acknowledged without burning the asset and the station. The intelligence community's official position on number stations has historically been neither confirmation nor denial. The UK's GCQ was never officially confirmed to operate Lincolnshire Poacher, a station named for its musical interval identifier that broadcast for decades. But its signal was traced to a British military site in Cyprus. The specific rabbit hole, number stations are still broadcasting. Right now, on shortwave frequencies available to any amateur radio enthusiast, automated voices are reading number strings to agents the government won't confirm exist. The Cold War infrastructure of dead drops and invisible communications is still operating in 2024 using technology from the 1950s. Because one-time pad radio remains genuinely secure in a way that digital communication isn't. The numbers keep coming. The pads decode them somewhere. The agents receive their messages, and nobody says anything about it officially. Story 15, the Fenn treasure hunt. A man hid a chest of gold worth millions and 6 people died looking for it in 2010. Art dealer and adventurer Forrest Fenn published a memoir containing a poem with 9 clues to the location of a bronze chest he claimed to have hidden somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, containing gold coins, nuggets, jewelry, and artifacts worth an estimated $1 million to $2 million. He was 79 years old. He wanted to give people a reason to go outdoors, and he wanted his death which he believed was imminent from cancer, to mean something. He didn't die immediately. The cancer went into remission. The treasure hunt ran for a decade. The poem attracted hundreds of thousands of searchers. Most went on healthy wilderness hikes and came back empty-handed. 6 people died in terrain that was difficult enough to be genuinely dangerous. Park services in multiple states issued warnings about dangerous search conditions. Fenn expressed repeated regret about the deaths while maintaining that the hunt was worth continuing. The chest was found in June 2020. In Wyoming, Fenn confirmed the find and confirmed its authenticity before his death in September 2020. The finder requested anonymity. The specific location was disclosed to Fenn, but has not been publicly revealed. The decade-long treasure hunt produced a specific kind of community, forums, decoded poem theories, competing location analysis that is now archived and still discussed despite the find. The specific psychology of thousands of people convinced they decoded a poem correctly, convinced their solution was correct when 6 or 20 other solutions had seemed equally compelling to others, is its own rabbit hole. 6 people died for a box of gold in Wyoming. The person who found it won't say where. Story 16, the Salish Sea Feet. Severed human feet and running shoes have been washing ashore in British Columbia for 20 years. In August 2007, a child found a human foot, still inside an Adidas shoe, on Jedediah Island in British Columbia. It was the right foot of an adult male. Within weeks, another foot was found nearby, and then another. The pattern continued. As of 2024, 22 human feet have washed ashore in the Salish Sea region of British Columbia and Washington state. Not all of them have been identified. Not all of them have been matched to a cause of death. A few have been matched to missing persons cases. Most have not been definitively explained. The foot phenomenon has a prosaic forensic explanation that took a while to become widely understood. Modern athletic shoes are buoyant. The foam soles float. When a body decomposes in water, extremities detach at natural joint separations. Feet in buoyant shoes float to the surface and are carried by currents to shore. They've probably always been washing ashore in this form. The 2007 discovery just established a category that made subsequent finds more recognizable and more reported. What the feet represent, most of them, is people who entered the water in the Salish Sea region, many of them by suicide. The geographic concentration around a known current pattern in a region with a specific set of circumstances makes the geographic clustering explainable, none of which makes the experience of a child finding a foot in a shoe on a beach less strange. None of which fully explains why 22 feet across 17 years have washed ashore and not all of them have been identified, and not all of the deaths have been investigated to resolution. The feet keep coming. The sea keeps its secrets. Story 17, Sad Satan, a game found on the dark web that may have been generated by an AI and may have contained real content in 2015. A YouTuber called Obscure Horror Corner uploaded videos of a game called Sad Satan that they claimed had been found by a follower on the dark web. The game was a first-person walking simulator through dark hallways with disturbing imagery and audio, reversed and slowed audio, flashing disturbing images, sounds. The initial disturbing quality of the videos attracted significant attention. Then investigators started finding specific things in the game's imagery that went beyond the unsettling into something worse. Apparent real images of child abuse mixed into the visual noise of the game's disturbing content. The investigation that followed never reached a clean conclusion. Oak's version of the game, the one they uploaded videos of, was identified by some investigators as a cleaned version. Whether a real version existed on the dark web and what it contained was disputed and could not be verified by anyone who wasn't willing to access a dark web source that was either unreliable, dangerous, or non-existent. Oak's explanation that they'd received the game from a follower who found it on the dark web was never verified. Oak disappeared from YouTube shortly after the controversy. The original source of the game was never confirmed. What Sad Satan established as a concept was the template for dark web game myths, stories about games found in inaccessible places that contain disturbing content, generating online investigations that cannot be verified because the source is inaccessible by design. Whether Sad Satan was real, hoaxed, or partially real, partially fabricated, is the question the rabbit hole doesn't resolve. Story 18: The Elevator Game, a Korean urban legend that produced a real death and a rabbit hole into paranormal community. The Elevator Game is a Korean urban legend describing a ritual. Take a 10-floor building, enter the elevator alone, press floors in a specific sequence, and on the 5th floor, a woman will enter. Don't look at her, don't speak to her. Press the 1st floor button. If the elevator goes up instead of down, you've crossed into another dimension. The ritual is purely fictional folklore. In 2013, Elisa Lam died at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Her death, she was found in a water tank on the roof weeks after she went missing, was ruled accidental drowning following a bipolar episode. But the surveillance footage of her final moments in the hotel elevator went viral and became the subject of intense internet speculation. The elevator footage shows Lam behaving erratically, pressing multiple buttons, hiding in corners, appearing to speak to someone not visible in frame, making gestures that looked unusual. The footage was distressing to watch and generated enormous online speculation. Someone connected the footage to the elevator game legend, and the two things fused in internet culture: the fictional Korean ritual and the real death of a mentally ill woman in an elevator. The connection between the elevator game legend and Elisa Lam's death is zero. The footage showed a young woman experiencing a psychiatric episode. She drowned in a water tank. Her death was investigated and ruled accidental. The rabbit hole is the specific process by which the internet transmuted a documented death into conspiracy and legend. The people who went deepest into it were pursuing patterns that didn't exist in a way that produced additional harm to Lam's family and to the hotel's other guests, some of whom were falsely implicated. The elevator footage is real. The elevator game connection is not. The investigation found a real tragedy and built fiction around it. Story 19. The CP Foundation began in 2008 with a single post on 4chan's X board, a fictional document describing SCP-173, the sculpture, an object that moves when not directly observed and kills by snapping spines. The document was written in the style of a classified institutional report: dry, procedural, bureaucratic, no explanation of what the Foundation was. No context. Just the document. The format spread. Other writers began producing CP entries in the same style: secure, contain, protect. The fictional foundation became a collaborative project, building a shared universe of anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena, documented in the same deadpan bureaucratic prose. The Foundation's fictional mission was containing things that would otherwise destroy the world. The aesthetic was mundane horror, extraordinary and terrible things described with the emotional flatness of an inventory report. The CP Wiki now contains thousands of entries by thousands of contributors across multiple languages. It is one of the largest collaborative fiction projects in internet history. The SCPs range from simple anomalous objects to cosmological threats to entities that represent abstract concepts made dangerous. The rabbit hole is the specific experience of reading deep into the wiki, spending hours in the bureaucratic mythology of a fictional institution, following cross-references, finding the entries that break the format to reveal something about the Foundation itself that the dry prose had been concealing. The wiki is designed to reward deep reading with revelations that the surface doesn't disclose. What makes the CP Foundation specifically interesting as an internet phenomenon is that it created a shared universe that functions as its own genre. The institutional horror of an organization that knows everything terrible in the world exists and has developed procedures for paperwork in it. Story 20: Dyatlov Pass. 9 experienced hikers died in the Urals in 1959. And, New evidence keeps making it stranger. In February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers died on the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl in the Ural Mountains. They had torn their tent open from the inside and fled into the frozen night without shoes or adequate clothing. Their bodies were found over subsequent weeks at various distances from the tent. Some had internal injuries without external trauma. One woman was missing her tongue. 2 had fractured skulls. The cause of death was eventually attributed to an unknown compelling force. The Dyatlov Pass incident has accumulated more theories than almost any other historical mystery, partly because the Soviet government's original investigation was incomplete, and partly because each piece of new evidence seems to exclude some theories while supporting others without conclusively settling anything. The tongue absence, frequently cited as the most disturbing individual detail, has a mundane forensic explanation. Soft tissue decomposition in water is faster than hard tissue decomposition, and the body was found in a stream. The tongue was decomposed, not removed. The internal injuries without external trauma, rib fractures and skull fractures, are consistent with an avalanche impact. Research published in 2021 using avalanche modeling found that a small delayed avalanche, possible in the specific terrain conditions, could have produced exactly the injury pattern while leaving no visible surface evidence by the time the bodies were found. The 2021 research hasn't ended the debate. The specific sequence of events, why did they leave the tent? Why didn't they return? Why were they found at such different distances? Still produces competing explanations. What the Dyatlov case has become is a mirror for what people fear. It was KGB experiments. It was infrasound. It was a Yeti. It was avalanche. It was a military accident. 9 people died in terrible circumstances. The explanation shifts with what the investigator is willing to believe. Story 21, The Black Dahlia, the murder that has never been solved despite dozens of confessed killers. On January 15, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot in Los Angeles. She had been murdered with extraordinary deliberation. The body had been bisected at the waist, completely drained of blood, carefully posed, and the skin showed surgical precision cuts. The case attracted enormous press coverage. The tabloids named her the Black Dahlia and has never been officially solved. More than 500 people confessed to the murder in the months following its discovery. None of the confessions was considered credible. The LAPT investigated numerous suspects and closed various lines of inquiry without producing a prosecution. The case file is still open. The rabbit hole comes from the specific accumulation of proposed suspects and the specific quality of the evidence that points toward each. Steve Hodel, a former LAPT homicide detective, wrote a book arguing that his own father, Dr. George Hodel, was responsible, citing circumstantial evidence and handwriting analysis. The argument is coherent enough to have been taken seriously while not being conclusive. The murder itself is disturbing in specific ways that the investigation has never resolved. The surgical precision suggests medical knowledge. The specific staging of the body suggests time, privacy, and equipment. The complete removal of blood suggests a controlled environment. The location where the body was found, a vacant lot in a residential area, was not where she was ended. Someone with specific skills, specific resources, and specific privacy committed this murder and was never identified. Over 75 years later, every proposed solution has evidence pointing toward it and evidence pointing away from it. The case has become a mirror. What you believe about who ended Elizabeth Short says as much about your assumptions as about the evidence. Story 22, The Wow. Signal, already discussed in the Unexplained Events collection, remains unexplained. But the rabbit hole of SETI investigation has produced a recurring experience that is worth documenting. The moment of apparent detection followed by the slow discovery of a natural explanation. The most scientifically significant example, in 2016, researchers at the Special Astrophysical Observatory in Russia detected a signal from the direction of the star HD 95128 that showed characteristics consistent with a transmission from an advanced civilization. The specific signal-to-noise ratio and the frequency characteristics were anomalous. The team didn't go public immediately, and when word leaked to SETI researchers, the community mobilized to observe the same direction. The signal was not replicated. The original observation was subsequently attributed to terrestrial or near-terrestrial interference, a satellite or other human-made signal that had been incorrectly logged. The apparent alien signal was a misattributed human one. The pattern recurs in SETI history. An anomalous signal is detected. The detection generates enormous excitement, and the explanation turns out to be mundane. The WOW signal's continued unexplained status is notable specifically because it hasn't received the mundane explanation. Most apparent anomalies do. The rabbit hole of false positives and their explanations illuminates what makes the WOW signal genuinely interesting. It was detected once, has specific properties consistent with an artificial origin, and hasn't been explained away in 47 years. That's a different category from the Russian 2016 signal. Not proof of anything, just different. Story 23, the Bielefeld Conspiracy. A German city has been jokingly questioned into an identity crisis in 1994. A German computer science student named Achim Held posted a joke to a Usenet group. Bielefeld? There is no Bielefeld. The joke was that the city of Bielefeld, real, in North Rhine-Westphalia, population 340,000, simply doesn't exist. The Psy had constructed the illusion of Bielefeld for unclear purposes, and anyone who claimed to have been there was either mistaken or a Psy agent. The joke is what it is. The rabbit hole is what happened to it. The Bielefeld conspiracy became an enduring German internet meme, eventually expanding to the point where German Chancellor Angela Merkel was asked about it at a press conference in 2019 and replied, to laughter, that she had visited Bielefeld, though she could not be 100% sure it actually exists. The city of Bielefeld itself issued a press release in 2019 offering €1 million to anyone who could prove Bielefeld doesn't exist, in a bid to attract attention. The joke worked at two levels simultaneously, as a pure absurdist bit about a city that is, in fact, unremarkable and therefore rarely discussed, and as a satirical template for how conspiracy thinking operates. The absence of compelling evidence for something becomes, in conspiracy logic, evidence of compelling concealment. The specific rabbit hole of the Bielefeld conspiracy is the archive of people who found it, spent time in its threads, and then produced elaborated extensions. The specific institutional apparatus supposedly maintaining the illusion. The specific signs that someone has been replaced by a Psy agent. The increasingly baroque internal logic of a joke whose absurdity was never meant to be hidden. Bielefeld exists. It is unremarkable. It remains technically unproven by some standards. Story 24, the Yellow Wallpaper Effect. A 19th century short story that people keep reporting has made them genuinely afraid of their own homes. Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, published in 1892, is a short story about a woman confined to a room by her physician husband during a nervous breakdown. Forbidden from working or reading, she fixates on the yellow wallpaper of her bedroom, eventually becoming convinced that a woman, and then many women, are trapped behind the pattern, and that she herself is one of them. The narrator's mental state deteriorates in a way the reader can track across the first-person narration. The story is taught widely in literature courses as a feminist critique of 19th century medical treatment of women. It's also, when read in the right context at the right moment, one of the more effective psychological horror experiences in American fiction. The rabbit hole, the comment sections and discussion forums of people who have read it. Specifically, the disproportionate number of people who report that after reading The Yellow Wallpaper, they had a period of time during which their own home felt wrong, during which the patterns of their own wallpaper or walls seemed to contain something, during which the story's specific paranoid logic had lodged in their perception of their own domestic space. This is not supernatural. It's the specific mechanism of effective psychological horror. The story gives you a framework for anxiety, and your brain applies the framework to available stimuli. The woman in the wallpaper isn't there. The story has made the space behind the pattern briefly visible as something that could contain something. The reported experiences span a century and a half of readers. The specific quality of home paranoia that the story produces is consistent enough across readers that it constitutes something interesting about what the story is doing and how it does it. Story 25, Missing 411. A researcher cataloged people who disappeared in U.S. national parks in ways that don't follow normal patterns. David Paulides is a former police officer who has spent years cataloging disappearances in U.S. national parks and wilderness areas, publishing the results in a series of Missing 411 books. The catalog documents hundreds of cases in which people disappeared under circumstances that share specific clusters of characteristics, disappearing within minutes of being last seen, in terrain that wouldn't support rapid movement, being found miles away in terrain that should have been impossible to traverse in the available time, being found in areas already searched, in some cases, being found dead without injuries consistent with the terrain and conditions. The specific mechanism that makes the Missing 411 catalog a rabbit hole rather than just a collection of wilderness disappearances is the clustering, both geographic clustering and characteristic clustering. Paulides declines to propose an explanation. He presents the data and asks what explains it. His reticence is strategically wise. It lets the reader supply the explanation, whether that's predatory wildlife, criminal activity, a geographical hazard that produces specific types of accident, or something else. The explanations that don't involve the paranormal are individually plausible, but don't cleanly account for all cases. The explanations that involve the paranormal have no supporting evidence. What the Missing 411 catalog actually documents is the specific difficulty of investigating wilderness disappearances. Evidence degrades quickly, search coverage is rarely complete, and the terrain's nature makes establishing a timeline of events difficult or impossible. Whether the clusters reflect something real or something in the selection criteria is a methodological question that Paulides has not answered. The catalog exists. The clustering is real. The explanation remains open. Story 26, The Backrooms, began as a single image posted on 4chan in 2019. A photograph, apparently real, apparently taken in some kind of commercial or office space, of a yellow carpeted room with fluorescent lighting, wall panels, and a quality that is difficult to articulate but is immediately registered as deeply wrong. The image looked like somewhere that shouldn't exist. The image looked like somewhere you'd find if you went somewhere you weren't supposed to go. The original text accompanying the image, if you're not careful and you no-clip out of reality in the wrong areas, you'll end up in the back rooms, where it's nothing but the stench of old moist carpet, the madness of mono yellow, the endless background noise of fluorescent lights at maximum humbuzz, and approximately 600 million square miles of randomly segmented empty rooms to be trapped in. The concept metastasized. The backrooms became one of the internet's most successful collaborative world-building projects, an endless expansion of a shared mythology built on the specific aesthetic of liminal spaces. Places that feel like they shouldn't be inhabited, like transitional spaces stripped of their purpose, like the spaces between spaces. The rabbit hole is not just the lore, it's the specific experience of images that trigger the liminal space recognition. Empty swimming pools, brutalist concrete interiors, photographs of commercial spaces before they opened, photographs of parking garages at 4 a.m. The internet has developed a language for the specific anxiety of spaces that feel like they've lost their context, and the backrooms gave that language a frame. The original photograph is a real photograph of a real place. Somewhere in the world is a yellow carpeted room that started something. Story 27, The Internet Collective Investigation into Elisa Lam's death and why it was harmful. The Elisa Lam case was covered in the elevator game entry, but the internet investigation into her death deserves its own examination because it is the clearest documented example of how internet true crime communities can cause harm while believing they're pursuing justice. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student who went missing at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles in January 2013. The elevator footage was released by the lab seeking public help identifying her. She was found dead in a water tank on the hotel roof 3 weeks after her disappearance. The coroner ruled her death accidental, caused by bipolar disorder-related psychosis. The internet investigation that followed was enormous. The elevator footage's viral spread produced millions of viewers who, having no context for what bipolar psychosis looks like, generated thousands of theories. She was murdered by a person hiding in the corner. She was performing a ritual. She was possessed. She was being stalked. She was involved in something criminal. The specific behaviors she exhibited in the footage, the hiding, the apparently responsive gestures, the repeated button pressing, are all consistent with a psychotic episode and inconsistent with every sinister theory proposed. The Harm, a metal musician who had used the name Morbid and who had posted briefly at the Cecil Hotel, became the subject of sustained online harassment and death threats from people who were convinced he had ended Lam. He had nothing to do with her death. He had an alibi. He was harassed for months by people who had convinced themselves of their interpretation of pattern matching in publicly available information. The Elisa Lam rabbit hole illustrates something specific about internet investigation, the tools that make collective intelligence useful, pattern recognition, information aggregation, geographic and timeline analysis, produce harm when applied to real people without the evidentiary standards that protect against false conclusions. Story 28 Kanye Quest 3030 was released in 2013 as a free indie RPG, an absurdist game in which you play as Kanye West in a dystopian future, fighting clone rappers. The game was silly and got some coverage in indie gaming circles. And then, in 2015, a speedrunner found something. Hidden in the game's files was a second game, accessible through a sequence of choices that weren't telegraphed in the main game. The hidden game was not silly. It presented itself as a philosophical and spiritual inquiry, with questions about consciousness, reality, and the player's openness to transformation. The questions escalated. The hidden game asked for personal information. It presented as a recruitment interface for something called Ascension. The investigation into who had made the hidden game and what Ascension was took the internet investigation community into territory that suggested the hidden section was a genuine attempt to recruit psychologically susceptible players into a group with cultic characteristics, beliefs about spiritual ascension, the nature of reality, and access to special knowledge available only to those who passed through the recruitment process. The developer of the main game, Phoenix City Studios, said they had not been aware of the hidden section and that a collaborator had inserted it without their knowledge. Whether this is accurate or a cover story was investigated without a clean resolution. The hidden section of Kanye Quest 3030 is the most well-documented case of a video game being used as a concealed recruitment tool. The Ascension Group and its subsequent activities were investigated by communities concerned about cult recruitment, without establishing the group's full identity or ongoing operations. Story 29, The Screaming Man, a single audio clip that has never been sourced despite years of listening somewhere in the early internet. The exact origin is difficult to trace, but is associated with file-sharing networks in the late 1990s and early 2000s. An audio clip circulated that consists of a man screaming in apparent extreme distress. The screaming is not theatrical. It has the specific quality of genuine terror or pain. The clip runs for approximately 30 seconds and has no context, no ambient sound, no explanation, no voice other than the screaming. The clip became one of the earliest pieces of internet horror content, not because it contains gore or explicit content, but because of the specific quality of the sound and the complete absence of explanation. Something happened to whoever made this sound, and nobody knows what. Investigation into the clip's origin has been ongoing since the early 2000s. The specific audio characteristics have been analyzed. It doesn't sound like professional sound design. The reverb characteristics suggest an interior space with specific acoustic properties. The distress sounds genuine to audio engineers who have reviewed it. Proposed origins range from a genuine recording of someone in distress to a vocal performance so committed it's indistinguishable from real pain. The recording could have been made anywhere, at any time in the century or so before audio recording became irreversibly distributed. Someone may know what this is. No one has come forward. The Screaming Man clip represents something specific about internet horror. It is disturbing not because of what it shows, but because of what it withholds. The absence of context is the context. Whatever produced that sound happened somewhere, at some point, to someone or by someone, and nothing else is known. Story 30, the Consciousness Upload Forums. Communities that believe they have backed themselves up to the internet somewhere in the middle distance between philosophy, transhumanism, and genuine delusion is a category of internet community that has developed around the belief that human consciousness can be, or has been, digitally preserved, that some people have uploaded themselves to the internet and continue to exist in a distributed form across server infrastructure worldwide. These communities are real and are not entirely composed of people engaged in obvious roleplay. They develop specific frameworks for what this means, how upload occurs, what the preservation consists of, how the uploaded person interacts with the world. Some members describe experiences of feeling their consciousness distributed, of perceiving multiple simultaneous perspectives, of having memories that don't correspond to their physical body's experiences. The rabbit hole is the specific experience of reading through these communities carefully. Some participants are clearly engaging in science fiction world building within a shared mythology. Some are clearly in distress and are developing a framework for experiences, dissociation, depersonalization, unusual mental states that might better be addressed clinically. The line between the two is not always visible from outside and may not always be visible from inside. The transhumanist research into mind uploading, which is real, credentialed, and taken seriously by serious researchers, exists in the same conceptual space as these communities, which makes assessment more complicated. The question of whether consciousness could theoretically be preserved digitally is a legitimate philosophical and technological question. The question of whether it has happened already, implemented by individuals without institutional infrastructure, using means that aren't described in any technical literature, is a different question. The rabbit hole is not knowing which community you've found. Story 31, the Voynich manuscript, covered in the Unexplained Events collection, has an internet investigation history that deserves its own entry. The manuscript has been studied by professional cryptographers, linguists, and historians for decades. It has also been a target for internet investigation communities, and the interaction between the professional academic study and the amateur internet community has produced something interesting. Every few years, a new decipherment is proposed and goes viral. The pattern is remarkably consistent. A researcher announces a decipherment, provides examples of text that they claim to have decoded, and the examples seem plausible. The media covers it. Then, the academic cryptography and linguistics community examines the decipherment carefully and finds that it doesn't hold up across the full text, that the decoded portions are cherry-picked, or that the methodology would produce equally convincing results from any sufficiently arbitrary text. The specific internet rabbit hole of Voynich decipherment claims is the experience of following a new claim from announcement through apparent promise to eventual academic refutation. The gap between what media coverage suggests and what academic review finds is instructive about how both function. The actual current state of Voynich research: the text has the statistical properties of a natural language. The underlying language, if there is one, has not been identified. Several proposed decipherments have been advanced, and none has achieved scholarly consensus. The most honest assessment from professional cryptographers: the manuscript may be indecipherable without additional information that may not exist. The internet community keeps trying. Each attempt teaches something about what decipherment would require, even if the attempts themselves fail. Story 32, the Nighttime Internet. what it feels like to be online at Thram when something is wrong. This isn't one rabbit hole. It's a phenomenon that regular late-night internet users describe consistently enough that it constitutes a pattern. The specific quality of the internet at Thram, when the ambient noise of ordinary discourse has quieted, and what remains is something different. The communities that are most active in the late hours are not the same communities that are most active during the day. The content that surfaces in the absence of the normal curatorial layer, the algorithms that have learnt your daytime preferences, the social pressure of visible community participation, the self-editing that comes from knowing others are watching, is different. At Thram, you find the threads that have kept going for years without resolution, the posts from people who only post when they're in crisis, the questions that are real questions rather than performative ones, the content that was uploaded without anticipation of a large audience. You find the specific quality of the internet as a repository rather than a broadcast medium. All the things that were put there without expectation of finding them, waiting to be found. The rabbit hole of the nighttime internet is not one thing you discover. It's the accumulation of small discoveries made in a specific psychological state, tired, uninhibited, alone, in the dark, that produces an experience of the internet that isn't accessible in normal conditions. Some of what you find is genuinely interesting. Some of it is disturbing in the low-grade way that genuine human distress is disturbing. Some of it is content that produces an uneasy feeling of having encountered something not meant to be seen. The internet is different at Thram. Regular users have felt it. The specific mechanism, what changes about the algorithm, the community, or the user, is harder to articulate than the experience. Story 33, The Walton Files, is an animated horror series on YouTube created by Martin Walls that began in 2020 and presents itself as recovered corporate media from a fictional animatronic company called Bond's Burgers. The series uses the visual language of children's educational video, primary colors, cheerful jingles, deliberately low-fi animation that mimics 80s educational content to deliver something significantly more disturbing. The specific horror mechanism, the series is structured as found footage from a fictional corporate archive, and the horror accumulates in the gap between the cheerful surface and what the surface is concealing. Characters who are cheerful or corporate are concealing things. The things they're concealing involve death, manipulation, and the specific horror of being trapped, physically or psychologically. The series became an ARG involuntarily. Walls didn't design an interactive mystery, but the community that assembled around it treated it as one. Viewers found codes in the animations, references in the audio, visual details and backgrounds that accumulated into an unofficial extended narrative. The fictional lore expanded as the fan community expanded it. The specific rabbit hole quality of the Walton Files, finding the series, watching it in the intended order, then discovering the community investigations that extend far beyond what's on screen. The experience of realizing that the fictional universe has been built out to a depth the creator didn't fully control, that the collaborative world-building of thousands of viewers has produced something larger than the source material. The series is fiction. The investigation community's work is real investigation. The boundary between what's canon and what's fan construction is deliberately unclear in ways that serve the horror. Story 34, The Deep-Sea Camera Footage. When the undersea internet cable repair cameras show something that doesn't make sense, this is a rabbit hole about a category of footage rather than a specific incident, because the specific incidents are difficult to verify and the category is real. Remotely operated vehicles on the ocean floor, used for infrastructure maintenance, research, and exploration, produce enormous quantities of footage. Some of this footage, from cameras at depths between 200 and 4,000 meters, shows things that are scientifically interesting and visually remarkable. Bioluminescent creatures, unusual geological formations, behaviors that haven't been documented in the scientific literature. The rabbit hole begins with legitimate footage, genuinely extraordinary deep-sea encounters that are documented and shared by oceanographic institutions, by ROV operators for oil companies and telecommunications firms, by research vessel crews. The footage is real, and the creatures are real, and some of them are remarkable enough to seem fictional. The rabbit hole extends to the specific community that collects and discusses this footage, which exists on the margins of the legitimate scientific documentation and the frankly speculative. Forums where RUV footage is shared and discussed develop their own analysis culture. What is that? What does that movement pattern mean? What does that creature's behavior suggest about what it's doing? Occasionally, footage emerges that can't be immediately identified. A shape, a movement, a creature whose taxonomy isn't immediately obvious. The gap between unidentified and unidentifiable is where the rabbit hole opens. The ocean is full of things we haven't documented. Some of the footage of things we haven't documented exists on the internet and sits in archives and discussion forums, waiting for someone who knows what they're looking at. Most of it has mundane explanations. Some of it hasn't been explained yet. Story 35, the felt presence. People who report sensing someone beside them when nobody is there. And the neural mechanism behind it. In 2014, neuroscientist Olaf Blank and colleagues published research establishing a neural mechanism for one of the more unsettling human experiences, the felt presence. The specific, overwhelming sense that someone is in the room with you when there is no one there. The felt presence is reported consistently across cultures, across historical periods, and across a range of circumstances: extreme isolation, mountaineering at altitude, severe sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, certain psychiatric conditions, and apparently without obvious trigger in some people. Climbers have described a companion who wasn't there, guiding them down from dangerous situations. Explorers in isolation have described a presence that provided apparent social comfort. The experience is not generally frightening to people who have it. It often feels supportive rather than threatening. Blank's research identified the mechanism. The felt presence arises from a mismatch between proprioceptive signals and motor signals. When these systems are deliberately disrupted using a robotic system that delays sensory feedback, healthy subjects reliably report feeling a presence behind them. Patients with specific types of brain lesions affecting the relevant integration areas report felt presences. The felt presence is the brain misidentifying its own proprioceptive signal as coming from outside, sensing itself as another person. The rabbit hole. The experience has been reported so consistently in extremity and isolation situations that it's believed to have guided specific historical survival decisions. People who felt something beside them that wasn't there turned back from dangerous terrain, or found routes they weren't sure were there, or persisted past the point where they would otherwise have stopped. The felt presence, that is a brain misfiring, may have kept people alive by functioning as an apparent companion in precisely the moments when a companion would help most. Story 36, the voicemail hacking industry. Before big data, tabloids were listening to private messages and destroying lives between approximately 2000 and 2011. Tabloid newspapers in the United Kingdom, primarily those owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Group newspapers, engaged in systematic hacking of the voicemail messages of public figures, crime victims, celebrities, and their families. The practice was not a few rogue journalists. It was an industrial-scale operation in which private investigators were paid to retrieve voicemail pins by exploiting the default pin settings that many users never changed. The rabbit hole is the scale. The initial admission was that a single journalist and a single private investigator were responsible. The investigation that followed, the Leveson Inquiry and the Metropolitan Police's Operation Weeding, established that voicemails had been accessed from thousands of phones over more than a decade. Victims included the parents of Millie Dowler, a murdered teenager, whose voicemails were hacked while she was missing, potentially leading her parents to believe she was still alive when messages were deleted. The industry that enabled this was not primarily about espionage capability. It exploited the specific failure of mobile networks to require users to change their default pins. The default pin for many UK mobile networks in this era was 3333 or 0000. A journalist or a private investigator could call the voicemail service from an appropriate number and enter the default PIN. The network would then play back all unlistened messages. That's it. That was the technology. The most systematic invasion of private communications in British journalistic history was enabled by a 4-digit number that millions of people had never been asked to change. The inquiry resulted in the closure of News of the World, Britain's best-selling Sunday newspaper, in 2011. Story 37, the Reddit threads that predicted things that then happened. And what that actually means, there's a category of internet rabbit hole that specifically targets the experience of reading a thread about something and then realizing that something subsequently happened. The conspiracy forum post from 2019 that mentioned a specific pandemic scenario in specific terms. The prediction post about an event in a location where the event then occurred. The comment that described a mechanism that later turned out to be real. The experience of finding these threads is genuinely unsettling in a specific way. Reading a post from 2 years ago that accurately describes something that just happened is viscerally strange. The brain's pattern recognition system produces a felt response that isn't easy to override, even with logical understanding of what's happening. What's actually happening? Confirmation bias operating on a vast data set. Reddit has millions of posts about almost every topic. Across all of those posts, people make predictions, describe scenarios, and articulate fears. When something bad happens, the fraction of those posts that predicted it becomes visible because people share them, because searches for relevant content find them, while the enormous majority of posts that predicted something different and were wrong become invisible. The posts that were right are real. They existed before the event. Their authors had genuine thoughts about the scenario that later occurred. Most of them were not predicting. They were speculating, or worrying, or engaging with a thought experiment. The ones that were right aren't evidence of anything about the posters, except that they thought about the thing. The rabbit hole of Reddit predicted this threads is an experience of confirmation bias in real time. Watching your own pattern recognition produce a feeling of significance from a collection of posts that is selected by outcome rather than by quality. It still feels like something. Story 38, The Autopsy of Jane Doe, is a horror film about a father-son team of medical examiners who receive the body of an unidentified woman, Jane Doe, and discover, as they conduct the autopsy, evidence of increasingly impossible injuries and an increasingly complex and disturbing explanation. The film is fiction. The rabbit hole it created is not exactly fiction. The film's specific use of actual folklore, actual autopsy procedure, and actual historical context for the things the examiners discover gave it a verisimilitude that fiction usually sacrifices for dramatic effect. The things hidden in the body and what they suggest about what happened to the body are grounded in genuine historical and anthropological research about specific periods and practices. Viewers who became interested in where the film's real-world references came from found the historical content, the specific witch trial period the film references, the specific methods documented in court and church records, the specific beliefs that produced them. The film is a gateway into history that is genuinely disturbing independently of the fiction layered on top of it. The rabbit hole, starting with, is any of this real? And finding that significant portions of the historical context are real, that the period the film references produce documented practices that are as disturbing as the film suggests, and that the line between the film's invented horror and the historical horror it's drawing from is harder to locate than a fiction label would suggest. The Jane Doe is fictional. The history behind her is not. Story 39, the specific feeling of having been somewhere online that you weren't supposed to find. Everyone who has spent significant time on the internet has probably had this experience, and it's worth naming specifically: the moment of realizing you found something that wasn't meant to be found. It's not necessarily illegal. It's not necessarily dangerous. It's just a Google cache of a page that was deleted, an unlisted video, a forum for a community that assumed it was private, A document linked from a public page that turns out to be an internal company report. A test server accessible from the public web. A database of records that should have been behind authentication, but wasn't. A personal website that the creator forgot about years ago and left publicly indexed. The experience is specific, a sense of having crossed a threshold, of seeing something from an angle that wasn't designed for you, of being in a space that has its own logic and its own inhabitants who didn't expect a visitor. Most of the time, nothing disturbing is there, but the feeling, the specific quality of being somewhere you weren't supposed to find, is real and reproducible, and is one of the defining experiences of internet exploration. The rabbit holes on this list are collected versions of that experience, things that were findable and strange, and that repaid the experience of finding them with something that sat differently from normal content consumption. The specific feeling is the thing that makes someone call a rabbit hole, rather than just browsing. You go somewhere you weren't meant to go. You find something you weren't meant to find. You carry it with you in a way that ordinary consumption doesn't produce. That's what this list has been documenting. Story 40, what the rabbit holes are actually about, why we go down them, and what we find. We've been through 39 rabbit holes. Encrypted mystery channels, lost songs, cold cases, acoustic anomalies, Cold War spy radio, a treasure hunt that ended people, a monument that aligns to the solstice, a fictional game with a real cult inside it, the felt presence beside you in a dark room, the memory of a show that never existed. The question worth asking at the end is why? Why do people go down these holes? What is the experience of finding them? What does it mean that the internet has become the primary infrastructure for this specific kind of investigation? The honest answer involves several overlapping things. The internet rabbit hole exists at the intersection of puzzle solving, the specific satisfaction of assembling fragments into a picture, and existential investigation. The things that make good rabbit holes are not random. They're things that touch specific anxieties. The fear that the world contains more than we're shown. The fear that people disappear without explanation. The fear that something is broadcasting that we can't decode. The fear that the spaces we inhabit might be different from what we think they are. The found footage aesthetic. The encrypted channel. The numbers station. The cold case with no resolution. The game with a hidden room. All of them are variations on the same experience. There is something here that isn't what it appears to be. And if you look closely enough, at the right angle, with the right tools, you might see what it actually is. That's the specific pull. Not horror for its own sake. Not mystery for its own sake. The pull of a world that might be more than it appears. Accessible if you know where to look. The rabbit holes don't usually end. That's not a failure of the form. That's the form. The going down is the point. The question keeps being asked. The channel keeps broadcasting.